I wanted to read a passage from Milan Kundera, which is, I find it both hopeful and sad, this passage. For those who wear black bloc and vandalize supermarkets and statues, they pulled out another statue in a cemetery as well in Portland a few nights ago. And for those who declare their lack of safety at yet another book of Jordan Peterson's being published, and for those academic departments that would like to limit the kinds of questions that are asked in some really misguided attempt to right the wrongs of history. This would also be useful, I would say, to illuminate for instance, New York Times op-ed columnists, what kinds of things can happen if you go down this road. So for those who don't know, Kundera is a Czech writer. I thought that he was gone, but he's not. He's 91 years old now, born 1929. He went into exile in France in 1975 and considers himself now a French writer. I think of him as a Czech dissident. But before the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, which was in 1989, which overthrew the Communist Party, which had been in power for many decades, the communist regime banned his books. So he was and remains a longstanding criticism of things like totalitarianism and communism, where it shows up, including in his home country. His Czechoslovak citizenship was revoked in 1979, but he was given Czech citizenship in 2019, something I learned in reviewing.
Wow.
And I received an email a month ago from a viewer of the podcast who pointed me to a short excerpt from this book, which I can only see, The Book of Laughter and Forgetting, which I have a copy because, as I have mentioned on this podcast before, I read a bunch of Kundera and Solzhenitsyn in my very first quarter in college when I was a literature major. And before I read this short excerpt, I will say there's just an historical note for a couple of people who are mentioned in here. And so this, again, from the person who wrote to me, the framing. Kundera mentions both Gottwald and Clementis, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. Gottwald was the president of Czechoslovakia from 48 to 53, and he allowed Stalin to gut the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia of most, if not all, of the semi-independent and well-intentioned intellectuals. Clementis, who famously had given his fur hat to Gottwald on a freezing day in Prague, and there's a photograph of Gottwald wearing Clementis's fur hat, was later seen as an enemy of the state and was cropped out of images. So this is one of these famous stories of someone literally being cropped out of images so that you only see Gottwald, and Clementis has been literally erased from photographic history. So those are Gottwald and Clementis from this. So I have this book that I've had since, I don't know, I guess 1987. But I actually found that the translation that was sent to me is one I like better. So I'm going to read this one. Since there is not this is again, from the Book of Laughter and Forgetting, which was written in 1979, when the Czechoslovakian Communist Party was still in power, before the Velvet Revolution 10 years later. Since there is not a single historic event we can count on being commonly known, I must speak of events that took place a few years ago, as if they were 1,000 years old. In 1939, the German army entered Bohemia, and the Czech state ceased to exist. In 1945, the Russian army entered Bohemia, and the country once again was called an independent republic. The people were enthusiastic about the Russia that had driven out the Germans, and seeing in the Czech Communist Party its faithful arm, they became sympathetic to it. So the communists took power in February 1949 with neither bloodshed nor violence, but greeted by the cheers of about half the nation. And now, please note, the half that did the cheering was the more dynamic, the more intelligent, the better. Yes, say what you will, the communists were more intelligent. They had an imposing program, a plan for an entirely new world where everyone would find a place. The opponents had no great dream, only some tiresome and threadbare moral principles with which they tried to patch the torn trousers of the established order. So it's no surprise that the enthusiasts, the spirited ones, easily won out over the half-heartedly cautious and rapidly set out to realize their dream, that ideal of justice for all. I emphasize, ideal and for all, because all human beings have always aspired to an ideal, to that garden where nightingales sing, to that realm of harmony where the world does not rise up as a stranger against man and man against other men, but rather where the world and all men are shaped from one and the same matter. There. Everyone is a note in a sublime Bach fugue, and anyone who refuses to be one is a mere useless and meaningless black dot that need only be caught and crushed between thumb and finger like a flea. There were people who immediately understood that they did not have the right temperament for the idol and tried to go abroad. But since the idol is in essence a world for all, those who tried to emigrate showed themselves to be deniers of the idol, and instead of going abroad, they went behind bars. Thousands and tens of thousands of others soon joined them, including many communists like the foreign minister Clementis, who had lent his fur hat to Gottwald. Timid lovers held hands on the movie screens, adultery was harshly suppressed by citizens' tribunals of honor, nightingales sang, and the body of Clementis swung like a bell ringing in the new dawn of humanity. And then those young, intelligent, and radical people suddenly had the strange feeling of having sent out into the world an act that had begun to lead a life of its own, had ceased to resemble the idea it was based on. It did not care about those who had created it. Those young and intelligent people started to scold their act. They began to call to it, to rebuke it, to pursue it, to give chase to it. If I were to write a novel about that gifted and radical generation, I would call it In Pursuit of an Errant Act.
Yeah. So, my goodness, struck by many things there. Maybe top of the list is his point about the fact that the communists were smarter. And I would point out that this is not uncommon, that there is something very appealing about a Marxist analysis to smart people. And it's in part because there's some truth in it, a great deal of truth. But the problem is it misses the collective action problem issue. This is exactly why it falters, and it is exactly why it necessarily leads to totalitarianism. Because the fact that you cannot get there through people's individual alignment of interests causing the collective well-being phenomenon to function, the fact that that is unstable because people's individual interest functions against the collective interests, that thing forces you to punish people into compliance. And
and he's arguing not only that they're smarter, but that they're more charismatic. He speaks to the appeal of the movement as well, that the people who, in the case of what happened in the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia in the mid-20th century, the people who were against the communist revolution were defending a status quo, and there was no passion there. There was no interesting narrative. They didn't have any interesting way forward. They were just defending what had been. And this is how much of the modern stuff is framed, too, that anyone who is denying this movement must be backward-looking, regressive, conservative, all of these things. And frankly, this is, I think often that is simply dishonest. It's a dishonest framing, but it does reveal that they've got the messaging right, they've got the charisma right, that we can simultaneously recognize the traditions and the founding principles on which we stand are necessary, and that we can do better, and that we can move forward with new ideas and be better than we have been, and that does not require and actually absolutely mandates that we not destroy all that has come before.
It also, I think, reflects a tendency, a very bad habit that virtually all of us have to some degree or another, which is to pay closest attention to the top of something and pay less and less attention as you move down, right? So read the abstract version and then barely skim the paper, if at all, phenomenon that we see in academia has a more general analog. And so the thing about Marxism, the part that does have real merit, has to do with the analysis of what happens under other circumstances. And the problem is that the prescriptive part is completely wrong. Why is it completely wrong? Well, not least because of this collective action issue, right? And so the idea that smart people are suckered by the first paragraph that sounds like something that they've seen. And then what they misunderstand is that if you apply the remedy that's proposed, it's snake oil at some level.
Yeah, no, it is. And unnuanced respondents will say, what, do you not think that socioeconomic class divisions are driving a lot of the problems in society today and at any other moment when a communist revolution has been proposed? To which many of us can say, no, absolutely. But your solution is wrong. And it will make things worse.
But your solution is wrong, and the degree to which you think that this is a problem is also wrong. So I have, the older I get, the more I realize that there is some sort of fundamental difference between those of us who think that absolute economic equality is a desirable objective, and those of us who believe that actually it isn't, and that although we would like a safety net that protects people from falling below an honorable standard of living, right, that you want people who bring great things to the world because they are determined to do it and invest mightily in order to get there. You want those people to have some upgrade to their quality of life. And you want people who decide that they're not really interested in doing anything for planet Earth. You want those people to live less well. It doesn't mean anybody should be homeless. It doesn't mean anybody should, lack health care. But the fact is, some equalization is probably desirable. A floor to well-being is surely a desirable state of being, but those who would pursue equality to the point of absurdity, and I mean economic equality, obviously other kinds of equality, we should strive for them, but economic equality is not in and of itself a good. Greater equality is from where we are because the inequality is so great, but equality itself is not the objective.
Well, I guess also there may be a problem with the words, right? Like we know that equality and equity are not the same things. And equality in general refers to equality of opportunity, and equity in general is referring to equality of outcome or identity of outcome. But then we can also speak to, for instance, equality under the law of men and women, right? And under the law is the important thing there, and it says nothing about what we expect outcomes to be with regard to relative representation in particular fields, in particular professions, right? Or death rates from particular diseases. You can't democratize the selective forces that have been acting differently on men and women for hundreds of millions of years. Not men and women, but males and females for hundreds of millions of years. You're not going to be able to do it. And imagine it, putting that as your goal means that, you win if part of your point is you always want to be in struggle. You always want to have a cause, and what you are primarily is an activist who must go onto the streets and proclaim that things must change. But if you're actually interested in a better world in which there could be a moment, if you cannot imagine a moment when you would be satisfied enough to leave the streets, then it's not good faith protest, and you have no business getting any of our attention.